Alrighty. Welcome, everyone. Have you ever wanted to sit down with a private aviation expert and learn more about the aviation industry, get the inside scoop? Well, you're in for a treat because today we're here with Doug Gollan himself, one of the most sought after private aviation journalists in the country. And not only is he an aviation expert, but he's also a very inspirational person. And I'm very excited to sit down here and speak with you. My name is Richard Zaire, and this is the Paramount podcast where we talk about everything aviation. So, with that being said, I would like to say welcome to Doug Gollan himself. Doug, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Richard.
Of course, my pleasure. Doug, for those of us that don't know a whole lot about you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, sir?
Yeah, a career media person. I started as a reporter, journalist back in the 80s. I was covering the airline industry, Part 121, back interesting times because it was still evolving out of deregulation. So, as 23, 24-year-old, and I was sitting down with some of the legendary CEOs of the airline business, people like Bob Crandall of American Airlines, who is credited with starting the frequent flyer programs and two-tiered wage systems. Back then, I live in Miami now, but big thing was Eastern Airlines, and there was Frank Lorenzo, who was trying to remake the labor scales. So it was very interesting. Started there, ended up getting onto the business side of publishing. Ended up starting a magazine that was distributed on private jets called Elite Traveler in 2001. I was a minority owner of that. I was president and editor-in-chief. It was a lifestyle publication, so it was more like a Neiman Marcus catalog, on steroids. Lots of beautiful suites and nice watches and beautiful jewelry. Left that, sold my interest in 2014, and became a contributor at Forbes, and was writing about private aviation. Forbes has an interesting network of specialist contributors who write about specific swim lanes, so human resources, smartphones, cars, different things. And so I was writing about private aviation, and I did a series of stories about them, for them on jet cards. And it was interesting because you see all the nice brochures with mom and dad at the kids' soccer game, and Fluffy on the hopping up the stairs. But what I came to learn was that, when you sign up for these programs, some of the contracts go on 10, 20, 30 pages, and it's really the contract you're signing up for. And so I collected a lot of information as part of that. It took me about 9 months to do the series, to gather the information for the series of stories. And once I was done, because most reporters use a notebook to take their notes, but when things get complicated, because I had been in publishing management, I was coherent with Excel, so I'd put things into a spreadsheet. And so I had all this data on different jet card companies. We tracked them by 65 different variables. And a few of the CEOs said there was really no independent buyer's guide, no place that it was easy for the consumer to compare the different programs. So a $99 WordPress website, I put it up. I thought $250 subscription for people spending hundreds of thousands or more, in terms of flying privately, to save them some time in terms of the research process, figure out, which companies match their needs, maybe it would work. And bing, 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 people started buying, and that's 8 years ago. And since I've also expanded it to fractional ownership as well, and then also covering some of the leading charter brokers like yourself, Richard.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, that's quite a journey. It's interesting how things evolve from one to the other. It sounds to me like you stumbled upon a need, and you started to look into it and you developed it, and it started out small, and today it's like the most sought after piece of information out there for regarding private jet cards. So I would imagine, did you go through those contracts? Did you go through a whole bunch of those contracts that are 20, 30 pages to get a better understanding? Or how did you get a better understanding of the market and the jet cards?
Yeah, I mean, really reading the contracts, I mean, into the database, that's the contracts are what give me the information to populate the database. And not everything in the contract is part of the database. You know, there are 65 different variables that we track. But when you read the contracts, you really start to get a feel for, you know, what the program is all about. And, you know, I always tell subscribers, you know, before they actually sign up, do read the contract. And I say that as somebody who's never read my, I've never read my AT&T phone contract. So,
I
and
wouldn't either.
I haven't, I pay a lot of money for insurance, health insurance, and I haven't read the
Oh
fine
my
print.
God.
So I'm a definitely a do, you know, don't do as I do, but do as I say type advice. But, you know, I find that the subscribers will come back and, you know, at least they know what they're getting into. And what I would say is when I get subscribers who reach out to me within an hour of subscribing, a lot of the time it's that they want to tell me that the company that they joined was horrible, and here's why I should write that they're horrible. And so I'll ask them, so tell me what made the company so bad. And they'll say, oh, well, you know, my plans changed and I wanted to get my money back. And I'd say, well, it's a non-refundable program. Well, nobody told me that. Or, you know, my friend Joe at the club was using it. It was great. I used it. I started using it, and they weren't honoring their pricing. And I said, "Well, tell me what weren't they honoring?" And he'd say, "Well, you know, I fly to Barbados from New York or Washington or wherever, and they were quoting me, you know, dynamic pricing. And you know, my friend, he flies to Naples, and he knows, you know, he's got an hourly rate and this and that." And I said, "Well, Barbados isn't in their primary service area." And he's like, "Well, nobody told me." And so, you know, a lot of what I do is really just helping people understand what they're signing up for, because the different programs are targeted at different sectors of the market. And so, you know, in the industry, you know, the providers tend to take the position that, oh, we can help you do anything. You want to fly to Zurich, we can do that. You want to fly to Atlanta, we can do that. And you know, it's sort of like if you were selling convertibles, you know, telling somebody who has a ski house, well, convertibles are nice too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I look at the landscape, I think the different solutions are good for different people for different needs.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, someone first coming into private aviation would think, well, you know what, I'm just going to charter a private jet, or I'm just going to sign up for a jet card. But we know it's really a lot more involved than that. I mean, there's so many details that, you know, we need to be aware of for the program to be the right program for us. So people reach out to you directly on your website, or they call you, or how do people find you when
Well,
they?
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, when they reach out to you and they talk to you about these challenges that they're having, how do they find you?
Well, so the website is privatejetcardcomparisons.com. And so people go there. And so I'm available for paid subscribers. It's right now $250 a year. We haven't increased the prices since we launched. There will be a price increase later this or at some point this year when the programmers can figure out how to implement it. But so rush now and save money. But people sign up and subscribe, and then I talk to them. My phone number, email, you know, so however they want. And you know, it's fun because it's the same type of people who are your customers, Richard, and they're successful business people. And you know, my busiest days tend to be Saturdays and Sundays, because that's when, you know, they've usually been gathering information from a few providers. And usually I'm not their first call. Usually they've talked to two and three, four companies. And after they've talked with three or four companies, and I'm sure present company excluded, but the tendency for the salespeople is to sort of slag the other companies. And so they get confused, and then they sort of see $250, compare everything, so they'll subscribe. And one of the things we do for subscribers, if they want, the database is really, it's an Excel spreadsheet. So if you're coherent in Excel, CFOs love it. Most people who have been involved in business, can look at Excel, so they're fine. But if you want a custom analysis, you answer some questions, takes less than 5 minutes, and we do an analysis. It basically says, based on what you told us, here are the companies that in the database have programs that match your needs. And then it's up to the subscriber if they want to ask questions. But our recommendation is to go and talk to the providers, because data on a spreadsheet is great, but the way they really get to the place where they can make a decision is talking to the folks like you and your team and your competitors, because you really give them the color and the background. And people are always like, oh, Doug, who would you choose? I don't want to talk to 6 companies or 8 companies or 4 companies. And I tell them, it's not me, it's not my money, it's a lot of money. And they really owe it to themselves to, now go to the next step, because at least they know they're talking to providers that when they sign the contract, if they're going to Barbados, they have a program to Barbados, or, whatever the need is. And so, the feedback I get is, sometimes I don't hear from them for another 8 or 10 months till they're ready to renew, and they tell me who they bought from, or they respond. We do a lot of research, or they'll come back and tell me, listen, Doug, I talked to all 6 of them. I'm now down to these 2. And, they may ask some more questions. But, I think, my goal is just to help save time for them, and also really educate them on the differences between the different programs. And, this industry has a lot of lingo, PSA, call outs, daily minimums, taxi time. And I have retired CEOs who subscribe to my service, and, they'll tell me, hey, Doug, I flew on the Gulfstream around the world for the last 20 years. And the only decision I ever had to make was, what color carpet we wanted, when we were getting a new Gulfstream. Nice Gulfstreams behind you, Richard, by the way.
Thank you.
And so, that they're sort of in awe of all the details, the fine print. And, it's really, once you get a hold of it, it's fun, because I'll talk to the subscribers, and, they're smart people. So I'll tell them, listen, if I get hit by a turnip truck, you're ready to take over private jet card comparisons. It's really,
God forbid.
it's really just helping them avoid those things where, they join the wrong program, not because it's a bad company or a bad program, but it didn't really match their flying needs. And, the example is some, as with the fixed rate type programs and the daily minimums, there are some programs that have 2-hour daily minimums on light jets. And if you don't know about it, and a lot of your flights are 45 minutes, you get a nasty surprise the first time you get an invoice for that 45-minute flight, and you see that 2 hours were deducted from your account. So it's really, I always say the jet cards and what I do is the shallow end of the pool, but, it probably matches. I was a C- student, so matches my my level of abilities.
So, yeah, so that actually partially answers my next question that I had in mind, which is, how do you stay objective when somebody comes to you and asks you for an advice? Doug, should I pick company A or company B?
Well, I don't help them pick. I tell them, listen, and like I said, it's their money. It's a lot of money. Make a decision. I think where I've really helped the industry, and a few people have said back, is that a lot of the inertia comes from, and again, because these are your customers, they're busy people. They're flying privately, not because they like to reduce their net worth, which it does. they fly privately because it's fulfilling a need, saving time, helping them with their business, helping them get more enjoyment out of their life, whatever it is. But the normal process of talking to, Joe at the club told me this friend told me this, I saw this advertising on CNBC, I 4 or 5 companies, I've reached out to them. The fact that it's a very competitive sales marketplace, the people who are selling in this market, the jet card and fractional salespeople, are highly skilled salespeople. They know about closing techniques, and they're very good at also, creating, they always say fear and doubt sells. And so they're all very successful at creating fear and doubt about buying from a competitor. And so I think what, people, the thing I like that subscribers will tell me is that I provided some clarity by comparing the actual contracts and the rules and the policies, because then you could sort of, as opposed to, where they would have, people said, a year ago, I went through this exercise. I talked to 4 companies and I never joined any because they all scared me about the other ones. And so at least they have the clarity that they know what they're joining in terms of the rules and the policies. And, $6,400 an hour, yes, but based on a 2-hour minimum, or $6,400 an hour, but there's a fuel surcharge and it's not valid to Barbados, so they understand what they're getting into. And because they're successful business people, like yourself, Richard, most successful business people don't make a decision until they feel comfortable with the information. And so really that's what, I do. And when it gets back down to them, I tell them I'm not a magic 8-ball. They're going to have to decide, who they want to join for themselves.
That sounds great. Yeah. Well, I have so many questions with
Yeah.
regards to the market. I just want to go back a little bit, back in the beginning, and just learn a little bit more about Doug Gollan, because we don't hear you talk about you very much. I'm just curious, Doug, what was life like for young Doug Gollan?
Oh, wow. How many hours do you have? I've been waiting for someone to ask me that question. Let me go. So, I grew up, my father was in the airline industry. Then he was in travel publishing. I followed a similar career path. He was a reporter and a journalist, and then he got onto the business side of publishing. If you look up David Gollan in the New York Times, you'll see a lot of articles by my dad in the 1960s about the airline business.
So he was a journalist.
Yeah, he was a journalist, and so journalist, aviation. When I was young, and he was editor of a travel magazine. That was back before Travel and Leisure, before Condé Nast Traveler, before the New York Times had a travel section. And so it was a trade publication, but it was back in the era in the 70s when the airlines were first getting their 747s and starting to fly to the U.S. And so, whereas my friends, I grew up in suburban New York in a nice middle-class community, but whereas my friends would be going to the Jersey Shore or Cape Cod or upstate New York for their family vacations, I was going to Europe, flying first class on Air France and KLM and Alitalia, and sitting up with my parents in the back in the top of the bubble of the jumbo jet up the spiral staircase, where they used to have lounges, and open bars and things like that. Now on the 747s, it's all seats. But it's how I grew up. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, this would be vacation, or this would be work
Well,
trips.
so it was vacation for me. I was like 8 or 10 years old. But for my father, who was a journalist, he was the editor of a travel magazine. When TAP Air Portugal or KLM or Finnair launched their first ever jet service, on a DC-8 or a 707 or a 747 to New York, which was the international gateway at that point. There weren't flights all over the country. Most of the flights, international to Europe flights, were from from New York. And so we would get into, my dad would get invited as media, and my mom was a photographer. You could see on the New York Times, she took photos. And so I would get, if Granny and Grandpa weren't available to babysit me, I get to go on some of the trips. And
How
it
old were you
was,
at that time?
oh, I was anywhere from like 7 to 15 during that period, and it was a very nice period. It was a different airport experience. There was one flight a day by that airline to New York Kennedy Airport, and it was their prestige route. And when we went to leave, the general manager for the U.S. of that airline would usually come out to see us off like we were, rock stars or, whatever it was. And, there wasn't the same level of security. I remember once we met my dad on a business trip, picking him up. He had come back. TWA had just gotten the 747s, and we met him at the gate, which is what you did back then. There wasn't the security. And, as we were waiting for him, one of the TWA people asked, the little kid, have you ever been on a 747? And think about this happening today. They took me on to this 747 that had just arrived from Los Angeles, and I was able to walk around, and the captain, sit in the cockpit and all of those things. So I grew up with aviation in my blood. In high school, I was a sports writer. I covered sports for a local newspaper. So you had a little bit of the journalism, and then you had the love for travel and aviation. And that sort of led me to my career and where I've ended up.
Wow, that just makes perfect sense now. I totally see it. Were you the only child?
Yeah, spoiled, you could say.
Wow. Okay. And so your father was a writer and your mom was a photographer. What an incredible duo team.
Yeah, it
And
worked. They were a very good team.
so would you say that that is the reason why one of the main reasons that inspired you to do what you do today is your parents?
Well, I had a love for travel. I wasn't getting hired as a sports writer. I liked writing, and yeah, I mean, and based on my grades in college, I probably wasn't qualified to do anything else. So, I sort of I've been fortunate. Everyone always says if you love what you do, you don't have a job, and just over my what would it be, 35 plus years since I got out of college, 37 years or something like that. I've been fortunate that the media world, publishing is and now digital media is a very interesting segment. General aviation, travel, I've always enjoyed. A lot of very nice people, and an interesting business that does a lot of good. Travel and tourism globally employs 1 in every 10 people. It's responsible for about 10% of GDP. When you go to the places like the Caribbean and Mexico and Africa, a lot of the places that the travelers, your clients visit and people who arrive by the airlines, that's 30 or 50% of the GDP. So it's travel and tourism that enables people to stay in their local communities. So great industries. And then, when I got involved with starting Elite Traveler, which was on the private jets, it gave me a whole new window to what was on the other side of the fence in terms of luxury goods, watches, jewelry, high-end real estate, and then private aviation. And then being a contributor for Forbes really was enabled me to, get a better understanding of private aviation from a more business reporting standpoint as opposed to the lifestyle. We signed a new celebrity chef, or we're sponsoring this polo tournament, down to, the nitty gritty of what I do now, which is, the devil in the detail, the contracts, and, sometimes the things that aren't so fun to write about, which is, companies that go out of business, or, as companies that turn out to, I'll quote a lawyer. From one of the filings about Aerovante, alleged Ponzi scheme. So, there's it's a lot of money, as in the business, and not everyone is ethical, and so that's the other side of it, is that, um, sometimes, not sometimes, but sometimes, I guess is the right word. If it sounds too good to be true, it may be too good to be true. And so you see, I know you and your company, you probably you hear from customers who are getting quotes about, that are significantly lower than your quotes. And so, what is it about, what's behind that quote? Sometimes it's just an older plane that's a must move, but there are other times where I think one of the industry issues is a legal charter. And, I hear that from subscribers where people are talking about, can nobody on your analysis could beat this price. And, well, what's that price of X, or, 50% of X? And it's, oh, well, it's some type of a lease agreement with four guys who have a jet and this and that, and they did this. And so I send them a couple of the stories I've written about a legal charter, because obviously, I guess the industry lingo is, instead of Part 135, Part 134.5. But as you know, Part 91, which is where the leases operate under, there are lower requirements for maintenance, maintenance plans, different requirements for the pilots in terms of the experience, and also training and drug testing and things like that. And so, that's one of the things I cover. It's not pleasant, but it's in an industry like this, there are always going to be people who have swampland they're trying to sell.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's bad apples in every single industry, and I've certainly come across those as well. So DG Experiences, I think, is another creation of yours that is an extension of some of these experience that you had growing up prior to
Well,
private aviation, right? Because it's DG Experiences is more about resorts and places that you can visit as a tourist.
yeah, so DG Amazing Experiences, it's a website too, but it's an e-newsletter. Is sort of the counter to private, or what would I say, sibling to private jet card comparisons. And so it has basically two reasons for being. One is that, the people, my subscribers to private jet card comparisons, they're interested in, when Paramount has a new program, or when there's a new program, or somebody's doing this or that. But not necessarily to read it every week, right? And so the one thing, and this was part of when we launched Elite Traveler, we realized that the commonality between the folks that fly privately is, some like watches, collectible watches, others, wear a Timex. Some like, Lamborghinis, others still drive, their dad's Toyota, or something like that. But they all like luxury travel and traveling. And so DG Amazing Experiences is a weekly e-newsletter for luxury travel. And so that keeps them engaged. Every issue, I have the headlines, anything I published on private jet card comparisons that week. So they can also, in addition to whatever the luxury travel aspect of that newsletter is, they can catch up on the headlines from private aviation. And then the other thing, as I mentioned, I'm a media business. So I have the paid subscriptions. And then one of the things that, all the jet card providers and fractional providers, they were always asking me, oh, Doug, can I pay you money, to refer people to me? Or can I buy your list, or things like that? And I've never believed in making the rich person the product. I don't think they like that. And so in DG Amazing Experiences, the e-newsletter, there's advertising slots. So that's my way to commercialize it. Here are the people who subscribe to my website. I'm not going to, I don't care, whoever you buy with, you buy who you want with. I don't want anything on the back end. I'm not going to do, I know there's some lead generation websites, and you sign up and you get 5 calls from 5 salespeople, and people don't like that. I don't sell your contact information, but I do monetize my audience by selling advertising in the newsletter. So that's DG Amazing Experiences.
That's great. Yeah, it seems to go well together, considering that it's designed for the same clientele in the same market,
Yeah.
which is wonderful.
And it's my background has always been trade and targeted media, and there's uh, I advertise for my stuff on Google AdWords. I know you do very good in terms of your promotions. Anyone who has a business, you try and get the earned media through PR. You do broader media, but in this market, the people that we're both chasing, it's really needles in the haystack. And I think that the statistic that came out at the beginning of COVID was out of the people who could afford to fly privately, which I forget who it was. One of the consulting groups said was like 1.5 million. They estimated, I think, 5 to 10% were regular private aviation users, and obviously that increased. But if you think about it from a media perspective, trying to reach 1.5 million households out of a country with 120 million, and the way media is fragmented today, niche media can be pretty effective. So, that's sort of the sales pitch on if you want if there are advertisers listening. I'm sold out actually on advertising, but that's sort of that would be a niche media type appeal. And I think probably we've never talked about what Paramount does in terms of its marketing and advertising, but when providers have shared with me the cost per acquisition, how much it costs them to acquire a new customer, it's not cheap. So it's I have a lot of respect for the flight providers, because I think one of the ways that you guys stay in business and grow is not very few people have the money to do the marketing that NetJets or VistaJet or FlexJet or Wheels Up do. But the more boutique or the smaller providers, you have to grow your business through referrals. And so the only way you get referrals from rich people is you do a good job for them. So I think, when I see businesses like yourself that are successful, I think that's a reflection on, the what you do for the customers.
Yeah, absolutely. Referral is really a big part of growing our business. It's and the reviews that we get from our clients, we take that very seriously, and the feedback that we get from our clients, and of course, we just go above and beyond, go the extra mile to make sure that the client is happy.
Well,
As
since you were gracious enough to invite me on your podcast, I will say that of subscribers I have that tell me they fly with you guys, it's been positive. So,
That's great to hear. Yeah, thank you, Doug. I really appreciate that. So, private jet card comparisons. I mean, it's been really interesting and inspiring to see how you've grown, and now learning a little bit more about how and where you got started. Was it like an easy journey, or was there like certain times that you came across certain obstacles or challenges that you had to face with the private jet comparison development?
oh gosh, I would say what the service I provide today is much better than when I started. When we first started, it was all a separate spreadsheet for each company. And I actually, when somebody bought, I had to manually give them the ability to get access to it. So now that's all automated. It's all in one spreadsheet with filters. Came up with a formula, because one of the things I was saying is just comparing, all $7,000 an hour light jet rates are not created equal. So we created a pricing calculator where it takes into account the daily minimums, how they charge taxi time, fuel surcharges. By the way, did they include the FET in the quote, and some other factors? So I wouldn't say that there have been roadblocks. I would say the only time, there are ebbs and flows, and my experience really in three different companies over my career was that you're always going to hit obstacles. 2008, 2009 was a huge obstacle for the publishing business. And even though we were in luxury publishing and catering to ultra high net worths, that didn't help our ad sales. It was an in-flight magazine for private jets. So we made our money from advertising. went down by about 70% in 18 months. So, wasn't pretty. With private jet card comparisons, it's been a fairly steady increase at the beginning of COVID, as you remember, in March, when everything had stopped. And,
I remember that. Yeah.
yeah. And so actually with my developer, a couple times we had to go on and, we kept testing because there were like 5 or 6 straight days that I didn't get a single sale.
So,
And
what was going
yes,
through your mind at that time? Like when in March, I mean, what were you thinking?
I think in the for like those 2 weeks, I was like thinking, I'm glad I have some money in my savings account.
Yeah, I understand. Like we just didn't know what was going to happen.
And then the flood came, and then it was then the and then the floodgates were opened, and I remember by July of 2020, July 4th weekend, that private jet flying was actually up to pre-COVID levels, and it was jagged recovery, and I think the other thing, it brought a lot of new people in. The research I've done shows that most of those people have stuck. 95% who came after COVID are sticking with it. But I think, not the untold story, but the challenge was that, and as a broker, you had to deal with it. But from an operator perspective, all of the supply chain issues, the labor issues, a lot of the MROs, the repair places, in COVID, they had shut down, right? Like everybody, they were either shut down by the government or they had shut down because all of the work had gotten canceled. There were no planes to repair because everything had gone onto hiatus. And so, as things got ramped back up, the people who worked at those MROs, they had found other jobs. They had moved away, and so MROs that used to have 2 shifts, 6 days a week, you know, still are struggling to find enough, technicians. And then there was, the whole supply chain, parts, windshields for, Lear jets and landing gear for something else and blades for, latitudes. And
Yeah.
Ken Rickey, who's the chairman of FlexJet, I remember in 2021, I think it was, at the NBA conference in Las Vegas, I was walking with Ken. We were going to do an interview, and Ken asked me. He said, "Do you know how many parts it takes, to make a plane fly, so a plane can fly?" And I had a feeling it was a trick question, but I didn't know the answer. So I said, "How many?" And he said, "All of them." And that's the truth. Is we've seen, and I know you see with operators where their intentions are good, and I think it's gotten better. There's a plane that was in for maintenance, and normally that maintenance would have been done on Thursday. And so they've booked flights starting on the Saturday or Sunday or the next Monday. And, on Thursday, they didn't get the plane back. And on Friday, they didn't get the plane back. And on Saturday and Sunday, and then on Monday, they call you and say, "Hey, Richard, really bad news. That plane that you booked 2 weeks ago for that trip, not available." And then you're having to go and scramble and find a recovery aircraft. And, it's the,
It's
yeah,
it's
sorry.
yeah, it's no, no, it's great. That it's part of the industry and just the day-to-day work that we do. Mechanicals are just, I mean, sometimes we have mechanicals with brand new airplanes. You just never know when the mechanicals can come up. But during COVID, it was an interesting time because Doug, it was, as you mentioned, March, everything completely shut down practically, and then the floodgates opened, and then there was the supply chain of parts sort of went to a halt, but the
Right.
demand went through the roof. So it was something like something that we had never seen before. Do you think that there will be any kind of long-term changes or effects due to COVID and private
Uh,
aviation?
I think the long term effect due to COVID is, um, that a sector of consumers came to view private aviation in a different way. And when the surge first started happening, Richard, it was the airlines were almost like grounded, right? They American had one flight a day from Miami to Los Angeles, and it was $29, but nobody wanted to get on it because there wasn't a vaccine, so there was the social distancing, and then and even if you weren't in the group that was high risk. People had children who had asthma. They were going to visit grandma and grandpa, or their parents who were in the high risk group. So people started traveling for the COVID avoidance, and then also the lack of the air service. And so what I think they found is, particularly for young families that had kids, younger kids, is that private aviation is like a dream, as opposed to going with a stroller and a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, even if you have pre-check, or clear going through the airport, what you can bring on, the bottles of formula and things like that. So for the family, and I'm sure you see it firsthand, people who, may have pulled back a little bit on, how they're using private aviation since COVID. The place I hear they're not pulling back is the family trips. Maybe family trip to Europe. That's an expensive trip, but, the family vacations to the ski resorts and the beach resorts, those are now done privately just because of the convenience. I think the other thing that I've seen where private
Due to
aviation,
COVID,
yeah,
right? Like these are people
yeah.
that were introduced to private aviation during COVID are now going once a year, maybe.
Well, it could be 4 times a year. It could be 6 times a year. It could be 2 times a year. But their vacations, when it's a family vacation, and I'll talk a minute about the people who I think have gone back to the airlines, but, it's just too easy for us, and we can afford it, to fly privately to our ski place or to the ski resort or to go down to Barbados. If they went back to the airlines one time, that convinced them, that airline experience just one time, no, let's keep doing at least that travel privately. The other, and you're in the Washington D.C. area, Richard. I'm in Miami, and I'm a former New Yorker. We can fly pretty much anywhere in the world we want, nonstop, pretty much, right? And so, especially from Miami or New York, or if you live in Dallas or Chicago. But the other new component I've seen with private aviation users who are regular users are people who are in those spoke cities. And so, Memphis, Nashville, Wichita, Kansas, Oklahoma City, Tulsa. And the stories they'll tell me is before the pandemic, for business, not necessarily owner trips, CEO trips, but people, you're in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you have a client in Buffalo, you'd send 4 or 5 people or 3 people for meetings every 6 weeks because these people are spending millions of dollars with you. And if American canceled the flight through Dallas, no problem, we'll rebook you through Chicago and you'd arrive 20 minutes earlier or 20 minutes later, right? Because of the hubs and the spoke and the way those things worked. And because flights are now at like 95% full, and the airlines are still struggling to get that capacity, and where they've added it is mainline routes and international routes that are more profitable, they've scaled back a lot of those spoke cities. And so the people were telling me, the subscribers, that the last 3 out of our last 3 trips we had to go up to Buffalo, all 3 of them got canceled because they couldn't rebook all of the people that day. 2 of them they can rebook 6 hours later, 2 of them the next day. And what would happen, and I was usually talking to the CEO or the CFO, is the client in Buffalo would say, "Hey, Richard, I love your company. We've been doing business for 20 years or since your dad or whatever it was. But, my people have schedules too. And, the manager in charge of the stuff that we buy from you is saying the last 3 times it didn't work out. We really we buy you because you provide great support and you do whatever. You need to fix things. And the interesting thing was, the fix was, well, we're going to charter or get jet cards to do the flights for where there's no nonstops. So if it's down to Dallas where there's 10 nonstops a day, you don't need to fly privately. But strategically, when they're going to visit a client they can't fly nonstop to, they were then using private aviation. And what the feedback I was getting is, the CEO is like, well, if I'm going to put the bill for the team to fly privately, I'll call up Richard and say, hey, CEO to CEO, my team is coming up next Thursday. Do you want to get together for dinner? And so the feedback is, yes, Zooms are great, but you do business in person. And so I've heard from companies that are adapting private aviation that never would have considered it, thought it was, an outrageous expense. How can I justify it to my shareholders? How can I justify it to my dad who started the company and, drove us around in a station wagon through 3 different states? He just wouldn't approve, or, things like that. Or to the other employees, it'll look bad to the other employees that were flying privately. They've come to understand what I know, you and I have known, is that, it is a business tool. And then you have a sort of another layer of people who, flew, they were happy flying from LaGuardia to Palm Beach on JetBlue, or from JFK to, Palm Beach on Delta, or whatever it was. And maybe they lived in Jersey, and they were going up to Newark, or they lived up in Fairfield County. And all of a sudden, they weren't really going to Palm Beach. They were going to Jupiter, right? And, they found out, oh, I can fly privately from Westchester to Stewart, and I'm 6 minutes from my place. And so, as opposed to getting on the JetBlue flight at 5 p.m., which means I had to leave my office at 2 p.m., and then getting to my house in Jupiter at 9:30, I can actually fly to, I can leave from Westchester County at 4:30, and I can be at dinner in Jupiter at 7:30. And so, people realize that private aviation's a time machine. Where I've seen the pullback is I do have subscribers who say, listen, when it's just me and I have my carry-on bag and I'm going on a route like, New York to Miami, or, Phoenix to Los Angeles. Some of them have the JSX type things, but American Airlines, you can get a first class seat for $400. New York to Miami, $800 round trip. That's $30,000 to $35,000 on a light jet. If you live fairly close to the airport and you're not checking luggage, and you have TSA or Clear, it's not the worst thing in the world. And so, people will tell me for those type of trips, they've gone back to the airlines. But I think private aviation has really opened itself up to a new section of companies and high net worth individuals who have come to appreciate that it really can enhance both their business and their life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is a very common understanding of about how if somebody's flying private, they feel like, well, they're just doing it for the glamour and it's just for fun, and they want to show off. But when we talk to people who are in business, I think one of the benefits is that they get to, well, save time. So saving time, convenience, comfort is definitely there, but also the ability to have more face-to-face interaction with the people that they do business with, right? That's a big one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like having a conference room. It's like flying in your conference room, right? You get to interact with the people who you're traveling with, and I think that also builds loyalty, right?
I
Because
was going
you're
to say relationships. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
spending more time with your key executives and people also in middle management. And I've heard that actually firsthand back from subscribers who will tell me that yeah, no, it's the it's interesting to have seen the evolution of people who are like, I'm only doing this because, and then they bought the 25 hours and they came back and bought another 25 hours. And then some of them bought shares, fractional shares or multiple jet cards, because once you use it, it's not cheap. It's expensive to fly privately. For people who can see the return on investment, they can see the return on investment. And like any smart business people, when they see that they're getting a return on investment, either in terms of giving them more time to do things that they want to do, being at their kids' soccer game, meeting friends for Friday night instead of waking up Saturday morning tired and wondering where one of their suitcases is. Private aviation provides a great benefit. And I think, as I was mentioning with travel and tourism, provides huge benefits to places that need travel and tourism. When we look at, private aviation, it supports over 5,000 airports in the U.S. And when I say it supports those airports, the airlines, the 121 airlines fly to, I think it's slightly less than 500 airports. And, we haven't really talked about it, but, there's the movement, the ban business jets or ban private jets. And what they ignore is that what would happen if those, 4,500 airports, if there wasn't private aviation? Well, they would close. And so what would you lose? You would lose a lot of small businesses that rely on private aviation in those communities, not necessarily Gulfstreams or jets, but they've got piston planes and turboprops. You would lose transplant, medical emergency. You go to places in Kansas, Montana, out in the West, the hospital isn't 2 miles away. It's 150 or 200 miles away. And so, those people would just die. You'd lose the whole organ transplant part of if you think about private aviation as being a fish tank. And then the other thing that you would lose is, when these folks, they say it's about climate, and obviously all of aviation is just 2% of global carbon emissions. Private aviation is just 2% of the 2%. But the other thing is, if you ban private aviation, when the Haiti earthquake happened, the thousands of the first planes that came in there were not airliners. They were private jets bringing in doctors and supplies, closer to home when the Houston floods took place. And I think there were over 100 people passed away. But the first help that came in was from business jets, private jets, bringing in doctors and supplies. And there would have been thousands of casualties if there had been no business aviation, if there had been no private aviation. And so I was at a conference last week in London called Corporate Jet Investor, and they actually invited a panel with 3 people proponents of banning private aviation. The question that came around, even if business aviation or private jets were carbon neutral, would you still want them banned? And the answer was essentially yes, because it's wealth. It's a sign of wealth inequality. So I think one of the things I took away from that is a lot of the banned business jet, because, there are some good questions in the audience, what jobs will these people, and they want to ban also cruise lines. They want to ban luxury hotels. They want to ban first and business class travel. But, when you ban these industries, what jobs will these people have? Because I went up and I talked to them afterwards and I said, don't worry about people in this conference room. Everyone in here is a talented executive and they'll find jobs in other industries. But what about all the people who make their money? They pay their rent and provide a living from their families in business aviation, in luxury tourism, in the cruise industry, where the crews come from. The people who work in the restaurants and the bars and housekeeping come from rural parts of the Philippines and Indonesia. What jobs are they going to have? No answers for that. And then, essentially, like I said, It's they couldn't answer the question about why banning private aviation was so important when it's such a small part of carbon offsets, except to say that the real argument or the real campaign is against wealth inequality. So,
Mm.
to me, that's a bit of a non sequitur. But I think, when we talk about private aviation and the coverage that it gets, Taylor Swift and things like that, I mean, by the way, Taylor Swift supports a lot of jobs with her concerts that attract 100,000 people. There are a lot of vendors and security people in those concert statements that pay their rent
And
because
her, and,
Taylor Swift performs.
yeah, and from what I read, all her flights are offset. What are your thoughts in regards to carbon offset? Because I mean, some of the feedback that we are seeing in the media is that even the carbon offset is not good enough, or it's not trusted. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that was also part of their argument is they didn't believe in the carbon offsets, and I believe as there's good carbon offsets and there are scams in carbon offsets, just like anything. They had some issues with sustainable aviation fuel. I think private aviation, has done as much as any industry segment in terms of becoming more sustainable. I think if you look, I think it's in the last 30 or 40 years, the average emissions per private jet has decreased by 40%, according to Climbing Fast, which is an industry advocacy group. If you go back and you say technological advances that are used by the airlines, winglets, composite materials, lighter weight materials, which mean less fuel burning, those are all pioneered with business aviation, the development of private jets. So if you didn't have the private jet industry, that technology may not have ended up translating to the commercial airlines. So I think with SAF and the carbon offsets, I think it's a sign that the industry cares and they're looking for solutions. And when you're looking for solutions to a problem, you're not going to be 100% right. I come from the publishing business where 90% of new magazines failed in the first year. And of the 10% that survived, 90% of those failed in the next 3 years. I know one of the new startup fractional providers, the CEO and founder, has a tech background, and he's told me in Silicon Valley, he said, a 90% failure rate would be considered good. And so, all of the stuff that we see, it's the same if you look at the pharmaceutical companies, the drugs that they get out there, it's 1 in 100, right? They're spending tons of money on research and development. And so SAF and carbon offsets, I think, are a good solution. It's a solution. In 3 or 5 years, will there be a different solution, a better solution? Will we go back and say, geez, we can't believe that, we're using carbon offsets because now there's something more, I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't think you necessarily, as the people who are speaking at CJI, the banned private jet group, they just want to discount everything and write it off. But that goes back to what I was saying. I think at the bottom line, and I think I give Al White, who's the who with his wife Lou run the corporate jet investor conferences and their website. I give him a lot of credit for bringing those people in because I think it's the takeaway was, wow, the emperor has no clothes. These people have a lot of strong opinions, but they don't have really any plans to on what would happen if they got their way. So fortunately, I think the other takeaway was that they're a lot more noise than substance. They're going to continue to do their protests, but there's very little backing up what they want to do. And so SAF and carbon offsets are good. I think the industry is spending a lot of money continuing to innovate, and it'll be interesting to see how it develops.
Yeah, it was interesting during COVID. as a broker, I think we had more flexibility to work with different operators in different regions because certain areas were getting shut down and
Right.
certain areas were opening. Certain operators were operating and certain ones uh, were basically stopping flights and doing business because they didn't have the parts or they didn't have the ability or the area was shut down. But one of the things that we were doing was we were in order to diversify is we were transporting COVID test kits with empty legs on G650s to the islands.
Okay.
And during that time, I remember someone mentioning that if it wasn't for private aviation, the economy would just shut down. And it was
I,
private.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it was private aviation that kept the economy moving forward during that
Yeah,
time.
and absolutely. And so, like I said, you see all of the stuff with Taylor Swift and this and that, and I'm all for Taylor Swift holding concerts at stadiums because that creates jobs. If she did them on Zoom, there wouldn't be as many jobs created. And I always get a kick. People are like, rich people drinking champagne. Well, Champagne is a province in France, and there are people who make their money. The reason they can pay their rent and provide for their families is they work in the vineyards where champagne grapes are grown. And so I really hate the stereotype about the rich people. I'm sure there are a
I
lot of issues, but
Yeah,
it's I think the one thing I told the band private jet folks is I said, if your real thing is about wealth inequality, private jets are your biggest friend. That's the fastest way that rich people redistribute some of their money to other people is spending money on private aviation. But I don't think they appreciated
biggest
my humor.
yeah, the biggest disposable income
Yeah.
expense. Yeah, yeah, I've had phone calls in regards to climate change and particularly in regards to uh, one question was, what do you think of Leonardo DiCaprio flying on a private jet to Switzerland? And I thought, my response was, I think you have to take a look at the net gain or the net loss. I mean, there might be some carbon that might be created as a result of that flight, but what is he doing to improve this world, and what is he giving back? Let's take a look at that part of it as well. And I think we have to just sort of take everything into consideration, and just be a little bit more open-minded. I think we get it becomes difficult when someone tries to make it black or white, right? Because I think it's somewhere in the middle.
Well,
Uh,
I agree, and I think the other thing too is if you go back down the supply chains to the OEMs, right? Uh, Textron and Bombardier and Embraer and Dassault and Gulfstream employ tens of thousands of people, and a lot of those factories are not in you know places, business centers, Savannah, Georgia, Wichita, Kansas, Montreal, where there are a lot of other good paying production jobs, in Brazil. And then you look at, where are the components coming from? And, those suppliers are spread all over the country. And so, while I think, obviously global warming is an important conversation and I believe is happening, and things need to be done to mitigate it. Again, you come back down and it's, I had a boss who once told me early on, he said, if you want to complain, have a plan. I believe me, I complain. I'm not a good employee, but you know, to look at what their complaints are about private aviation and the minuscule offset out of all of the carbon offsets around the world that take place targeting this industry is really it's like if the Titanic was sinking and your first job was to go down and talk to the people in the salon about redecorating the salon on the Titanic. It's really, if these people truly care about climate change, targeting business aviation, private aviation, if they were successful, it would be like repainting the first class salon on the Titanic, because they're sitting there saying there's the impending doom for the planet. And if you want to give them that, targeting private aviation, if they're successful in shutting it down, it's not going to be enough to help the planet. But what it will do, and some of the other things, part of the impact is it'll put a lot of people out of jobs in places that they're not going to be able to find employment. And so, what these folks might find happening is that the pendulum is going to shift back and they're going to have a lot less support. And if they truly believe that, global warming is an impending threat that we have to take care of, they're all of a sudden going to get blowback from people who lost their jobs. Just like in the 80s and 70s, people lost jobs at manufacturing because they were all offshored to, Southeast Asia and things, in South America and Mexico. They're going to find a lot of people who don't want to hear about global warming because I lost my job because of something you did. And, I think the shame of it is if you believe that global warming is an important issue, and it is, the whole idea of targeting private jets is basically not going to make any impact whatsoever. There are going to be a lot of detrimental effects. And so it's a shame that these people who are energetic and, believe in their cause, like I said, I think they're working right now on redecorating the first class salon on the Titanic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's interesting. Doug, if there was somebody out there that was interested in pursuing a career in the aviation industry, or uh, getting a job in the aviation industry, uh, what advice would you give them?
Well, I'm actually looking to hire, so I'd tell them to come and call me up. Uh,
What positions are you hiring for?
well, we'll see. Right now it's me and I have some part-time help, but I'm looking for somebody who can help me grow the business because there is an opportunity to scale it a bit. But I would tell them that a great place to start is get a job at depending on what they're looking for, but working with a broker, working with an operator if they want to be in the flight provider segment. There's nothing better than learning working in a company like yours, or working at a charter operator out at the airport. There's a local broker here in Miami. He lets me from time to time sit in his airport to see how the sausage is made. And once you see that, and once you see everything that you do, what Paramount does behind the scenes, you really come to appreciate, that it's complicated, coordinating all of the different elements, double checking on everything. So anyone who's interested in having a career, I think, working at a charter operator, working with a broker like yourself, it'll give them an opportunity to really understand all of the different components that are in the industry. And, maybe from there, an opportunity to, decide that I really want to pursue this part of the industry or this part of the industry. So I'd encourage them to try and join a charter operator or a charter broker, just to get, you can go to school, and school is good. And, if you're Embry-Riddle, there are plenty of schools that have aviation programs and business aviation programs if you're getting out of high school. But if you're looking for like a second career or not sure what you want to do, I've always found that the best way to learn an industry is getting a job in the industry.
That's great. And how about if there was someone out there that was interested in pursuing a career in journalism? What advice would you give them, Doug? And by
Well,
the way, how did you
yeah.
realize that you were interested in writing? Was there something in particular, some event that occurred or that took
Well,
place?
when I was growing up, My dad, he was editor of a travel magazine, but he freelanced for the New York Times. So I was used to my father on Saturday and Sundays in the den, the sunroom, you know, finger on his typewriter doing these freelance stories for the New York Times. So I grew up appreciating, journalism. I would tell you, I always say the two, if you want to make money, like the type of money to afford flying on private jets, media publishing and aviation are probably two industries to avoid. So I'm at the center of both of them. Journalism is a difficult industry. I think right now, if you look at all the major publishing companies, they're all struggling. Everyone's trying to figure out how do they create a digital platform? How do they create the next Facebook or something like that? And, for journalists, it's been a lot of pressure. It's been 25 years of reducing the headcount on, in terms of the newsroom. And, if you used to have 6 beat reporters, now you have 3 beat reporters covering 9 beats. And so for journalists, it's a lot of pressure. It's going to be, it's something that you have to be passionate about. And there's all sorts of different reporting, from lifestyle reporting, where you report on, new watch and spirit launches, to, business reporting and product reporting and things like that. So
How about
no real advice, except that it's a very difficult industry with a lot of turmoil and change. And I did, not to segue, but I know one of the ads that NJSAP, which is the union for NetJets, as they're negotiating with the company about a new agreement. One of the first ads they ran was about a pilot who went to NetJets and then left to go to the airlines for better pay. And the call out in the ad is, when I joined NetJets, I thought I was going to have a job for life for 40 years. And, I had to chuckle because, if you're going to go into journalism, count on, you're probably going to go have at least a couple experiences where the company that hired you shut down, or layoffs or things like that. So it's a worthwhile profession. I get a lot of enjoyment out of writing and reporting, but it's definitely not a layup.
what about ChatGPT? Does that change anything for journalism?
Well, that's a great question. I actually, when we redid the website, there were some pages on it about airplanes that my developer said a little bit more content, and I got a ChatGPT subscription just to, see what I could come up with. And, the first 3 or 4 times it looked good. And then I would think it was like Williams engines or something. And I'm really not into, the specifications on airplanes. It's not an area of my knowledge. I was like, I don't think this one has that type of engine. And then I went in and dug a little bit more, and it sounds very authoritative. What I found is that it's like, the joke that, I Googled it, or, somebody from the internet told me. And so I'm sure it's going to improve. There are going to be a lot of companies and people who make a lot of money selling AI and ChatGPT. It's going to have some applications. I know one of the things, as you bring up the question, that was, oh, well, this is going to wipe out journalists. What it will do is it will wipe out publications or media sites that try to use it, unless they have somebody who they're paying to go out and edit and fact check everything. So of the many challenges journalists have, I don't think that ChatGPT is going to be one of them.
So how do you keep on top of what's new and what's up and coming in the industry and what's happening in the industry? How do you stay above and ahead of everything, Doug? You always have the latest news before anybody else. And how do
Well,
you do it?
one of the big jet companies he asked if I was tapping into their sales force, because he said I was reporting on things basically before they announced them, and even internally, I guess. But what I have, and is I have thousands of subscribers. And those subscribers I have a relationship with. It may be an email relationship. It may be that they've subscribed and I've helped them with an analysis. And, they'll feed me back that, company X told me,
Mm,
that this or that is going to happen. And, what it is company X, they told their salespeople that, starting next week from Friday, we're going to change things. And now company X's salespeople go out to their good clients or their prospects and saying, hey, listen, if you can sign up before next Friday, we're going to be announcing something new. And the subscriber, sends me the email from the salesperson or that tells me what they were told. And so I get a lot of things like that. Or, I think it was Georgia Jet just announced they were shutting down their charter operations. A subscriber had a flight booked through a broker. The broker had contacted the subscriber to tell the subscriber that the Georgia Jet wasn't going to be able to do that flight, and that they were shutting down, or they weren't shutting down, they were stopping their charter. And so I got in touch with the broker. He told me, what he had gotten in the email from Georgia Jet. And then I reached out to Georgia Jet and talked to them, and I had a story nobody else did. So that's one part. I have a lot of Google alerts. So to give credit to technology, and I credit, listen, I say thank you every day to Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, and because I have a business where I only need a Wi-Fi connection. Google alerts are helpful. I track a lot of different things with Google alerts, and then, like I said, subscribers. So I'm in a unique position that I get a lot of information that other journalists just wouldn't have, because of the nature of private jet card comparisons and the way I interact with people who are actually flying privately.
that's great.
So
Yeah.
no secrets. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's not like what was the movie with where I had to go, all the President's Men. I don't have to go and meet people in a dark garage at night behind a concrete pole, and so nothing quite that interesting.
Doug, I wonder, was there any particular person in your life that has come through for you, that has been helpful to you, that has really made a big difference in your career, that comes to mind? And can you share a story in regards to that?
Well, I would say there are a lot. So I'm very fortunate, right from, my parents. Obviously I was influenced by my father. I wasn't the best student in high school. And, it was, I got, the way I was really able to break in was that I wanted, during college, an internship. And my dad had, he was retiring from the magazine he was at, but he didn't want me to have the internship because he didn't think I was well, he had some good reason, but mature enough, I guess. And my mom pressured him to make sure that I got a chance to get the internship, which I did. So I have to credit her, and credit my dad. And then what else? People, once I started in the working in the industry, I had some very bosses that I learned a lot from. On all aspects. The one magazine I was at sort of accumulated several legends of our industry. So I had these people who had been around for 30, 40 years to share with me, and this is back before you could Google things. And then, in the private aviation industry, the people, some of the CEOs who've encouraged me when I first did the Forbes story. It was Andrew Collins from Sentient, and Alex Wilcox from Jet Suite, Brad Stewart from, at the time, ExoJet, sort of said, what are you going to do with all that stuff you gathered? And, some of them suggested that, I start a website, because there was, like I said, there are lead generation websites where you are the product, but, and their encouragement was, charge the consumer and give them, data. and, don't get involved in the fights back and forth. And that worked out pretty well. So I would have to say that I owe them all Christmas gifts or holiday gifts. But I've been fortunate, and sometimes you have bosses where they're successful people, but you learn, you see them doing things that you wouldn't do. So I always tell people who are asking me, they're thinking about changing jobs because they hate their boss. I said, that is a reason, but sometimes for the future, you can learn why that guy or woman is the boss. They probably do some things well, but you can also learn from your working environment, things that you're like, well, if I ever get in a position of leadership, I would never do it that way. And in the future, you'll be able to test your thesis. But yeah, unfortunately, I have too many people to mention, and then I would say definitely my father and mother, and then I think my early career where I was writing about the airlines. Think about it: a 23-year-old kid going down to Dallas, interviewing people like Bob Crandall or Frank Lorenzo when he was the chairman of Texas Air, or the late Colin Marshall, who was turned British Airways around from one of the biggest loss-making airlines to one of the most profitable, and implementing new strategies and how you deal with customers. And so I've just been, that's one of the reasons I like journalism and reporting, is being able to talk to interesting people like yourself, Richard. And everyone has a different story, and constantly learning. And then the other side of that was the publishing, the business side of publishing, because as a journalist, you hear one side of the story. When you're in publishing side, on the business side, and you have to sell advertising to people, then you hear what the real problems are, beyond the press release. So it's a fun industry. I've had a nice ride and enjoy what I'm doing. So thank you to everybody who's helped me out along the way, because I need plenty of help, as people will tell you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to you, Doug, for doing what you do. And you've always been there for us, whenever we've had news and we've reached out to you, whenever I've have questions and I need advice or I need clarification, I've picked up the phone and I've called you on your cell phone directly, as you know, and asked questions. And you're so kind and generous with your time. And just want to say thank you so much on behalf of everyone at Paramount for what you do and the industry, if I may.
Well, no, and thank you to you guys. I love this industry. I like the people in it. What you guys do at Paramount, I think I've told you, I view what you're doing, because you don't have, the fixed rate guaranteed jet card. But what you do is a little bit more akin to what I would say the luxury travel advisors, who, are dealing with clients on a one-by-one basis, and based on what they're looking for and their specific needs, coming up with solutions that meet those needs. And I think one of the interesting things in the industry, and one of the reasons I'm really bullish on good brokers who understand, both qualifying a client, but also understand the industry, is, you can book the St. Regis in Rome on Expedia or hotels.com. But for the client who flies privately, the place in the travel industry that's doing the best is actually high-end travel advisors. And the reason they're doing the best is because they've got the relationships with the hotel general managers, just like you do with the different operators. And so when you call me as a travel advisor to book that hotel in Rome, the St. Regis, yeah, maybe the rate is a little bit more expensive or less expensive through me. But, when you book on hotels.com or Expedia, you're going to get what they call run of house, which means, one bedroom suite, the one that's overlooking the back alley, boom,
Where the construction is.
Yeah, versus, if when you're dealing with a good broker or a good travel advisor, the travel advisor is going to call the director of sales or the GM and say, I have a very good client coming, arrange the early check-in. Can you make sure and they know the different suites that have the good views, and the good agents have these lists of the different hotels, do not sell. And it's, do not put my customer in these rooms, but please try and put them in this. And that's why luxury travel advisors are doing so well. And I know from brokers, I know that the good brokers like yourself, you'll be using operators, but there are some planes they have that just haven't been refurbished, or you didn't like the crew. And you'll be like, yeah, I don't want that plane. I want this plane and that plane. And I think that's the type of thing technology just can't replace, because you see all the press releases about apps and Uberizing private jets. But I like all aspects of the market. There are different solutions that are right for different people. But keep doing what you're doing, Richard, because you're doing well.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate those words.
Thank you.
We hear the term good broker and bad broker. Uh, what would you say is are the main differences between a good broker and a bad broker?
So what I would say about a good broker and bad broker, it's probably I would define it a little bit different. Good broker, average brokers, bad brokers. There's like in any industry, there's a lot of people who are average. Good brokers don't try and understand what the client is looking for and help them find that solution. I have brokers who just do on demand, who refer clients who, for some of their travel, would benefit from a fixed rate guaranteed jet card, and they'll refer them to my website, because for that type of trip, they know that that type of product is a good solution, and it's not something that they excel at. And a good broker has great relationships with their operators. I think I see a lot on websites and PR releases, access to 8,000 planes or 20,000 planes or 5,000 planes. But what I've found is that, it's the 20/80 rule. And so, at the end of the day, a broker's doing 80% of their business with 20% of the operators. So, they may use 100 operators a year, but there's really 15 or a dozen that they use. Those are the go-to operators. And so that's a sign to me of a good broker. They're not always getting, it's not always, it's the price. It's the plane shows up and the crew is ready to fly, right? And so what you guys know that's impossible to tell because they don't publish on-time stuff like the airlines, it's not safety, it's reliability. And there are some operators that are just more reliable. And then out of fleets, there are some planes that are less reliable because it's a managed plane and the owner has his or her airplane on a 135, but they have the tendency to pull it or change things around. And so that doesn't make it a bad operator. But you, because of your knowledge, know that I don't want Doug Gollan's plane, because if his daughter wants to go to a Taylor Swift concert, he's going to cancel the flight and pull the plane, or tell me the pilot's sick, or give me some Bubba story. And so I think the good brokers are that involved in the industry. I'm sure I'll be seeing you at Scheduler and Dispatchers in Fort Worth. And it was great. I was there last year. And you see the brokers going to meet with the operators, and the operators are the exhibitors. But why are they going there? It's not that actual business is transacting, but you're investing in yourself in that relationship, because you want the people in dispatch and charter sales at those operators to have the face with the name. So when there is an issue or it's a problem, it's not just somebody calling from some charter broker. It's Richard or one of the people from Paramount Jets. We saw each other 4 weeks ago. I need your help working this out. And I think that's what makes a good broker.
Wow. Thank you, Doug. I'm going to ask one more question in regards to the private jet comparisons and just jet cards and private jet card comparisons and just jet cards in general. I know that you probably get this question a lot, Doug.
Sure.
If somebody was to come to you and say, Doug, what's the best jet card? What would you say?
Well, I'd say, pay the $250, fill out the form, and I can tell you which programs work for you, so based on where you're going, if you're going to Zurich and Johannesburg, it's going to be different than if you're going from Leesburg to Charlotte, so it all depends on the rules. Do you need a 24-hour call out, or, are you booking 7 days in advance? Are you flexible to avoid peak days? Because with these jet card programs, peak days are like joining a second program. So some of them have surcharges. Most of them have longer call outs, or pretty much all of them have longer call outs. In some cases, you can't cancel after you book on a peak day. They also can move the departure, generally plus or minus 3 hours. So if you say 4 p.m., sometimes as much as the morning of, they could say, Richard, we're accelerating your departure to 1 p.m. or to 7 p.m. So I always tell subscribers, I need you to give me that information to help you out, because, I really don't have an opinion. I like you, Richard, but, it's not I like a company or I don't like a company. It's based on what your flying needs are. Here's what you should look for. And so there are times, and your program is dynamic pricing. It's wholesale plus it's a markup, but you're then sourcing specifically what the person wants. So I've had one subscriber. He was in a jet card program, but he had medical appointments. I forget, but the type where you schedule them, you fly to them, and if it's a 11 a.m. or 11:30 a.m. appointment, if you miss that, it's like weeks until they can reschedule you. Mm-hmm. And so he wanted the plane positioned at his local airport the night before, so there wasn't a delay in repositioning or fueling or anything like that. And jet cards and fractional ownership don't do that. You tell them the time and they'll show up, but there are delays, right? And so, for him, I was telling him, your best solution is going with a charter broker and telling them. So you can also arrange, costs more money, but they can arrange a backup if it's that important, your health. There are other people who, just based on their needs, there aren't good or many jet card solutions. So, the best jet card, there's a story on my website called 16 Reasons to Use a Charter Broker. And there's probably more good reasons, but, even though it says private jet card comparisons, it's fractional ownership and it's on-demand charter. And so, I think, like I sort of said earlier, it's like cars in a driveway. You might have a convertible for the place at the beach. You have an SUV for the mountain house. And so 60% of my subscribers are in fractional programs, also have jet cards. 50% of them also use charter brokers. They had a broker when they first started out. I'm sure you have customers. Maybe they went and they bought a plane or they bought a share. But, the interesting thing is people need supplemental lift. Supplemental lift could just be that your spouse is going someplace on the same day that you need to go someplace, so you need 2 aircraft solutions. Supplemental lift may be that we do 2 trips a year to the Caribbean in my program that works great, or my broker that's great for my domestic trips. When he quoted me prices down to the Caribbean, they were, wow, very expensive, because there was repositioning involved. And yes, there are some good programs that you can join that, have good pricing for the Caribbean. So it's less what I think. And, it's the good programs for what you're looking for.
Wow. That was amazing. Thank you, Doug, for that. Really appreciate that. And such a great analogy with regards to the different vehicles for different reasons and different needs.
And so, by the way, not just to give you a gratuitous compliment, but I think, there's always a lot of me too in this industry, or something, people see something. And so, you've had a specific type of membership and you've stuck with it. And, it takes discipline. Everybody, because it's needles in the haystack, everybody wants to, when you can't close somebody and they go to somebody who's buying a fixed rate card or a fractional card or something like that, or a fractional program, there's always the temptation to say, should we be offering that too? And, there may be good business reasons, but, there are people who get into the fixed guaranteed jet card space that shouldn't do it because they're either going to lose their shirt on some flights. It's a difficult business, or they're really not set up to fulfill those things. And, you see it sometimes with the operators. They'll pop up with their own jet card program, and 2 years later, it may still be on the website, but they're not offering it anymore because they found it's harder to execute than you may imagine. So, listen, I always respect people's business decisions. And then, like I said at the beginning, my goal is only for subscribers to be able to lay out, based on what you're looking for, here are the options and here are the people you should be talking to.
Thank you, Doug. And as one of the subscribers, I can tell you firsthand that there's a lot of useful information in there, especially for the price. It's a no-brainer. Doug, before we move on to the 10 questions that are pretty much yes and no questions, just gives us a little bit more insight into Doug Gollan. Can you tell us a little bit about how people can find more information about you and the programs that you provide?
So if they go to private jet card comparisons, there's an S on comparisons.com. There's information on that, on how to join and what you get. There's also a lot of good free content, and you can sign up for a free newsletter. So gives you the travel newsletter too. And I have people who subscribe on, which I always like when they first come to the website, but I have other people who were getting the free newsletter for a year or two and saying, I like what you write, I like what you cover, and now I'm coming to the end of my share, or I'm selling my jet, or whatever it is, but now I'm going to become a paid member or subscriber also. So if they visit the website, it's hopefully apparent how they can join and find more information.
That's great. So private jet comparisons with an S.com.
No, private jet card.
Thank you.
Comparisons.com.
Thank you for the correction.
It's a very long name, so no worries.
Understood. Private jet card comparisons with an S.com.
Correct.
Wonderful. Okay, so here we go. Here's your quiz questions. Yeah. Doug, what's your dream city?
Miami.
And that's where you are?
Yes.
Good for you. Congratulations. Morning person?
No.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Book or a movie?
Movie.
Summer or winter?
Summer.
Sweet or savory?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'll say savory.
Wow. Mountains or beach?
Beach.
Introvert or extrovert?
Introvert.
Really? Past or future?
Future.
Wonderful. Well, there you have it, everyone. Doug Gollan, and I hope you enjoyed this interview. Doug, it was such an honor to speak with you and spend quality time with you. Thank you for all the information. Thank you for everything that you do for the industry. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we finish our conversation?
No, it's a great industry, great people. And, the only thing I feel badly about is the amount of bad publicity it gets. A lot of the media that pick up on some of the climate campaigning and the banned private jets, because if they really look deep beyond it and what the motivations of those people were, and, like I said, fine to complain, but have a plan. My takeaway is these people don't have a plan, and they're also, if their true concern was about global climate warming, they would be doing other things that probably would have a better return on their passion and their investment. But I think it's been revealed that their motivation is a little bit different. So I like the industry, I like the people in the industry, and I'll work hard also to try and make sure the story gets out there about what the industry truly does and the benefits it provides.
Yeah, and you're doing a fantastic job with that, Doug. Thank you so much. Thank you for the representation as well, sir.
Thank you. A pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me on your podcast. I truly appreciate it.
Pleasure is truly ours. Thank you so much, Doug.